Welcome to Paul's Second Missionary Journey. This is a presentation that augments your Greek Exegesis course on Thessalonians. In this series of videos, we are going to look at Paul's Second Missionary Journey that's recorded in Acts 15 through Acts 18. And we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to look at the historical background of the text and the geographical background of text. Now, this is part of our journey through Thessalonians. And I'm your host for this journey. My name is Susan Harris, and I'm your instructor. We're first going to look at where the historical setting fits within the Greek exegesis. Greek exegesis has an idea that you need to look that the Greek text is accurate before you study it. You're going to look at the intertext, which is, do we understand the words? Do we understand the grammar and the syntax of the words so we can make sense of the sentences? And then we're going to see what the paragraphs mean inside the textual and contextual settings of the writings. So let's get started. Let's look at Acts 15, and we'll start at 35, where it tells where Paul and Barnabas are before we start the discussion for the second missionary journey. And I'll read from the English. In our other settings, we will read from the Greek and work through the Greek language. It says, "But Paul and Barnabas stayed in Antioch, teaching and preaching with many others also the word of the Lord. And after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, 'Let us return and visit the brethren in every city in which we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are.'" Well, the first question you have to ask is, why were they staying in Antioch? Why start their missionary journeys and stop their missionary journeys in Antioch? Paul had lived in Tarsus. Barnabas had been in Jerusalem. Why were they in Antioch? Well, this Christian church was in Antioch, the site of a large Jewish settlement, which also had a Christian settlement. It was out of Herod's control. How did they get from Jerusalem to Antioch? If you look at the lower arrow on this map, you'll find that it's Jerusalem. And from Jerusalem to Antioch, they went through the Roman map that followed several things. If you look at the map, you'll see that they could have gone up the coast, through the mountains, around the other mountains, and right into Antioch. Well, why was Antioch a place of a big setup? Well, it was part of three key cities in the Roman Empire. Rome, obviously the capital with the emperor, the senators, and the equestrians, which were the oligarchies that ran the Roman Empire for money. And by the way, make sure to watch the other video, Rome. It's all about the money, where we talk about these oligarchies. Then you had Alexandria and Egypt. Egypt was the breadbasket. It always had food because the Nile ran because the rains came in the south of Africa. Well, this breadbasket grew lots of grain in the delta, and the grain was gathered and taken to Alexandria and shipped to Rome. Did you know Nero didn't lose? Emperor Nero, who persecuted Christians, who had a horrendous sexual appetites and cruelty, was not kicked out because of these things, but because he did not run the empire at a profit and keep the grain supply coming to Rome. Well, that's how important it was. They created large clippers, ships that transported the grain. Why did they need Antioch? Antioch was their way to get to Galatia, the inner Turkey, or to get to the Euphrates. And you notice I've got two places. Antioch sits at one end of an isthmus called the Exegesis Sinus, which is their name of saying there's this portion of the sea next to Titus. In the middle of it is the Sicilian plains, where you find a passage. So by going through a mountain passage near Tarsus, and then going across the Sicilian plains into along the seacoast and over another passage into Antioch, you could go from Turkey into the walkway down to Egypt. The Hittites did this. You could also come from the Euphrates down the river, down the same passage, down the walkway to Egypt, and that's where the Babylonians or the Persians did. Well, the Greeks also used this to come from Macedonia, the Macedonians with Alexander the Great did this to come from Macedonia all the way to this area and then to the Euphrates. And where the yellow dot was the site of a large battle between the Greeks and the Persians. Well, as you know, the result of that is Alexander conquered most of the world. And yet he died shortly thereafter, and his generals took over it. And it's these generals that we know about from the writings of Strabo, one of the first geographic writers. He talked about where the various parts were in the known Roman world. Well, one of the parts was Syria, and in the fights, one of the generals, Seclusus Nictor, had captured Syria and created 4 larger cities: Antioch, Apodane, Seclusiperia, Amidea, and Laodicea. Now, notice that Antioch in the Greek says Antioch he at Dephane. You know, so the point was Antioch Epiphane was probably Antioch at the place near the Delphine, and we see where the names come from. Well, as he created these, the second one he created, Seleucia in Padua, was the port city that was associated with Antioch, and that's where he got his money. Let's take a quick look at what Antioch looks like today. Here's a modern picture with the river Ontes running through it and the mountains in the background. Let's look at the ancient pictures. You see in the background we have, up at the sort of left-hand corner of this diagram, you see there was an imperial palace, a hippodrome, and other things on an island. This was very key because islands could be withdrawn, armies had to go across it. You see a bridge going across it to a colonnade, and that colonnade street is the Agoraphoria, or the marketplace of the city. It goes down this long things, and that's probably where Paul would have practiced his trade of tent making. Now, you notice the road to Alexander coming out of that, and the road to the pier. Now, with the little blue dot down here was the Jewish community. Notice it was keenly placed between these two markets, and the P is for where we see the Christians. Now here's a picture of what it might be, where you can clearly see the island, and you can see, as John Chrysostom noted and others noted, that this was a carefully laid out city with not winding streets but clearly laid out blocks. Now if you look at it on this current picture of Anakya in Greece, you can still see where the Jewish settlement might have been, and the roads out of town, and the river, and where the Christians. Let's close this by looking at the pictures of St. Peter's Grotto, a place where St. Peter was might have retreated or had a catacomb to pray or to have meetings, and eventually the place that was shown, the church that was built on top. Well, thank you very much for paying attention to the first video. Our next video will continue with Acts 15:36 through 40. Thank you.